All right, what is going on, everyone? We should be live and recording. So, hope you guys are having a great day so far. So, a little bit of a different setup. I'm trying out with the new laptop I got. It was pretty insane. I got this new laptop like a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and I'm not used to working on a laptop with like the little trackpad to like move around and scroll on. And uh, probably for like 2, 3, 4, 5 days after I got my laptop, after using it a lot the first couple of days. I had this like crazy soreness in my forearms, something I have never experienced ever in my entire life. I think it was probably from these like really internal muscles in your forearms that I don't normally work, and them just being like really fatigued from like spreading my fingers out and closing them in, like zooming in and scrolling and stuff with like my fingers on the trackpad. And it was insane. Like I had a full tube of toothpaste that I could barely squeeze out and get toothpaste on my toothbrush. And like my wife is calling me a baby, but I have a really high pain tolerance, I think. And this was like almost unbearable. And I had to like mess around with my workouts, my training sessions, had to skip a couple of training sessions, or I didn't skip any entirely, but I did basically only do like one exercise for a couple of them because I just couldn't do it anymore. It was insane. It lasted probably for like 5 or 6 days, and then now it's gone, thankfully. But never experienced that kind of soreness in my forearms. And like I deadlift nearly 500 pounds every week at some point, and so it's just insane. But hopefully the setup looks good. Hopefully the laptop isn't getting in the way of the camera and stuff. But wanted to talk about this study that I was reviewing or looking at. So I'm subscribed to Alan Aragon's research review, really awesome research review where he kind of summarizes new research when it comes to fat loss, body composition, gaining muscle strength, health, nutrition, all of that. He'll pick, I don't know how many, maybe like 5 or 6 articles and talk about them each month. So it's a really great way for like coaches like myself to really keep up with new research without necessarily reading like the raw research all the time, because that would be so difficult to keep up with everything, that's being published. So he has this research review, and there was this really interesting study that he had on here that was looking at the difference in fat loss and weight loss in aerobic training, basically cardio, resistance training, so lifting weights, or doing both at the same time. Not necessarily in the same session, but just like having maybe, let's say, 3 days of lifting and 2 days of cardio within your week or so. And looking at the differences in fat loss, and this is obviously super relevant to like, you, if you're listening, probably with your goals you probably have, super relevant to all of the clients that we work with. So obviously, I really wanted to dive into this and look at this. So this was a meta-analysis, which basically means, if you're not really familiar with the research, a research study where they basically took a bunch of other research studies that looked at this topic and did statistical analysis to look at the averages and see, okay, what kind of significant differences overall on average we're seeing with all of these studies into account. So like one research study looks at like one group of individuals or two groups and kind of compares the two and sees, okay, this group of 15 people lost this amount of fat, this group of 15 people lost this amount of fat. But a meta-analysis kind of takes all of those studies that are relevant out there. So it might combine, let's say, 10 or 15 different studies together and look at, okay, what kind of differences are we seeing? So meta-analysis are really great ways to get an overall idea of what the research consensus is kind of pointing to. So took a look at this, and it was really interesting. So they looked at, like I said, how much each of these training styles, so cardio, lifting, or combination of cardio and lifting, how they impacted fat loss, and also they looked at lean mass retention, so basically muscle mass retention, which is super important too, because if you have a goal of you want to lose 10 pounds, lose 15 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, you in your head, you're probably thinking, okay, I want to see that weight on the scale gone, but most importantly, you want to lose that weight from fat mass. You don't want to lose that weight from muscle mass, right? Because there's a ton of negative health ramifications of that. And also, like if you're trying to achieve a certain look, like you want to look more defined, look more toned in your legs, your arms, wherever, midsection, you want to keep that muscle mass around. Super interesting, looking at this. So when they kind of analyzed all of these studies, when they looked at reducing absolute fat mass. So what kind of method of training, cardio, lifting, or a combination of the two, lost the most amount of fat mass, fat loss out of this? they saw that aerobic training, so cardio, and concurrent training, which is both combined, they were significantly better at seeing fat loss compared to just lifting alone, which is really interesting and really important to just kind of like take that piece of information and kind of soak in and think about it. Okay, like having some kind of cardio in there was a little bit better than just lifting alone. So now let's kind of look a little bit deeper, see what other kind of differences I saw, and see maybe and speculate why maybe that's the case. So they did a deeper analysis then, and they looked at concurrent training, so cardio and lifting and cardio, to see which one burned more body fat out of those two. And they saw no differences. So basically, it looks like the addition of the cardio made the biggest difference in these people losing more body fat, because having lifting and cardio didn't really burn any extra body fat compared to just cardio alone. So let's look a little bit deeper though. When they looked at their body fat percentage of these groups, so what kind of differences in not just fat loss, but body fat percentage change, which is actually what most people are probably aiming for, because if you lose 5 pounds of fat, but you also lose 5 pounds of muscle, and your body fat percentage actually doesn't change, you're not actually going to look maybe that much leaner. And when they look at the body fat percentage changes between those two, or between the three different training styles, there weren't actually any meaningful differences. So in the end, aerobic training, so cardio, led to more fat loss and weight loss overall, but it also led to more muscle mass loss if you were just doing strictly, cardio, aerobic training versus lifting, or lifting and cardio at the same time. So that's a super important point to emphasize, that like if you are somebody who are trying to lose body fat and you're trying to lose weight, and you're like, well, like looking at this study, the first couple of outcomes, it seems to point to cardio being the most important for losing weight. But when you look a little bit deeper, you realize, hey, maybe they lost a little bit more absolute fat loss, but at the same time, they lost more muscle, which isn't good for a variety of things that we'll probably get in in this video towards the end. Another thing that they did, which was really good and really interesting in this, is they did kind of like calorie matching with this. So they not only saw, okay, like the group that did just cardio or the group that did cardio and lifting burned more body fat than just lifting alone. They did some analysis to see, okay, what if we match the amount of calories that people are burning in these workouts, and then saw if there are any differences? Because cardio in nature is going to generally burn more calories than lifting, because when you think about lifting, you are doing a set of like 10 reps, maybe, let's say, and then you're resting probably at least a minute. Some people really shorten the rest periods, but let's say you're probably resting at least 1 to 2 minutes between sets, if not maybe even 2 to 3 minutes between sets sometimes. So there's a lot of period when it comes to lifting where you are not actually physically doing anything. You're just kind of like recovering from that last set. Whereas cardio, you're continuously moving. So if you do like 30 minutes of cardio, your body is continuously moving for 30 minutes versus if you do 30 minutes of lifting, it might only be actually moving for maybe half of that time or maybe a third of that time, where the other half or third of that time, you're just kind of sitting there resting between sets, which is good, which is what you should be doing with lifting, but it's just a different style of training. So if you just take a 30-minute cardio session and 30-minute lifting session, the 30-minute cardio session is going to burn more calories, which what we know about calories and fat loss, it's probably going to lead to more fat loss. But what they did was they matched the two. So they did some analysis to see, okay, what if we did 30 minutes of cardio and we matched that with 30 minutes of actual lifting and so on. And when they actually matched those two or those three, and they accounted for calories burned during the exercises, they actually didn't see any difference in fat loss between those three. Like those differences disappeared, which this is super important because it reinforces that with whatever method you do, cardio, lifting, or lifting plus cardio, the calories that you are absorbing and your body is taking in versus the calories that it is expending, not necessarily just through exercise, but through the entire day, that's kind of the breaking point when it comes to what's going to end up leading to more fat loss or fat gain, or less fat loss and less fat gain. So it reinforces that just because you're doing cardio because theoretically, it's going to burn more fat. It's not actually burning more fat on a calorie per calorie basis for what you're doing. It's just, moving around constantly is going to burn a little bit more calories than, lifting, especially if the time isn't matched. So that was a really important thing that they did in this study, because that shows, okay, if you're going to do like maybe higher volume lifting training and burn the same amount of calories in lifting that you would in a cardio session, you will burn the same amount of body fat actually, because you're burning the same amount of calories in the session. But the benefit of having lifting in there is that it's going to also lead to better lean mass or muscle mass retention. So while aerobic training led to slightly more fat loss and weight loss due to simply burning more calories, it also led to more muscle loss too. So this is why when you're really trying to put together what kind of workout schedule or workout routine that's going to be the best to achieve the most amount of fat loss, but also going to retain the most amount of muscle, I think it's important to really prioritize lifting and resistance training and have that be like the foundation of your program. Now, I think cardio is great to have in there. And this is something that I actually have changed my mind on like over the years. When I first started coaching back in like 2017, 2018, I was really big on like, I wouldn't encourage people not to include cardio, but there was this like fear mongering going on in the fitness industry of like, okay, if you do cardio, you're going to lose a lot of muscle, like even if you are lifting too. And thankfully, like that has changed over time with new research that, hey, like you're not going to actually lose that much muscle, if any at all, if you are still prioritizing lifting too. But obviously with this study, like if you take out lifting entirely and just do cardio, you are going to lose some muscle. But this is why I think it's really important to have lifting be the centerpiece of your like workout program, because then you can check off that box of, okay, I'm going to maintain all my muscle. And as long as you are burning the same amount of calories in your lifting sessions and matching that with cardio, you're going to burn the same amount of body fat, right? Like that's what this kind of showed. And then maybe supplementing that lifting program with either a step goal to kind of get your quote unquote cardio up. Now, some people will argue, okay, is walking really necessarily cardio if your heart rate's not up? But it's more about the movement and the calories that you're burning, not necessarily about how high your heart rate is. So I like to supplement the lifting with a simple step goal. And then if a client maybe really, or if you really like to have cardio in there and you want to for the heart health benefits, which are, really important, then maybe have a couple of, cardio days where you're doing maybe 20 minutes of moderate intensity cardio on the elliptical, or going for a jog, or maybe something else that maybe you find is fun, like playing pickleball or chasing your kids around or something like that. Doing that a couple times a week is probably super beneficial too, because now you're kind of getting the lifting benefits of being able to maintain the most amount of muscle, and you're getting the same fat loss benefit on a calorie per calorie basis that you would with cardio. But now you're kind of making sure your energy expenditure throughout the day is still pretty high because you're reaching, a minimum step goal. And then when you have some time, a couple of times a week, adding in that extra cardio to work on your heart health and to also just burn a little bit of extra calories, get a little bit of more icing on the cake is beneficial too. But a variety of reasons why we want to really prioritize lifting, and I think have that be the foundation, is because, like I said, you can match the fat loss on a calorie per calorie basis as long as you're training intensely and you're burning roughly the same amount of calories you would with cardio. Number two is that it maintains lean muscle mass, which is super important for a variety of reasons. One is if you have a body composition goal, like you want to actually look a certain way, you don't just want to lose weight for like health reasons or to see the weight in the scale go down or to just fit in a smaller clothing size. Like you want to actually like be able to wear a bathing suit, bikini, or even just wear something that like a tank top that shows your arms or something and see that muscle tone. You want to have some lifting in there because you don't want to lose that muscle, because then you'll lose that muscle definition that you're probably aiming for. Also, lifting weights, I can't stress this enough, is so important for bone mineral density, which is so important as we age, especially for women going through menopause and the hormonal shifts that happen there that lead to decreased bone mineral density. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe bone mineral density for women peaks at like mid to early 20s, if I'm not mistaken there. So like it peaks there. And then if we're not stimulating an increase in bone mineral density through resistance training or lifting, years after that, your bone mineral density is just going to slowly start to decrease over time, which isn't beneficial for, preventing fractures, which is super important, especially as we age, because you don't want to be immobile and deal with a variety of, issues there, ulcers, being on bed rest, and then even more muscle wasting if you are on bed rest. And then just overall strength too, and preventing injuries over time. Like the more muscle you have on your frame, the more resilient your body is going to be, the more resilient your joints, your tendons are going to be to just take on the stress of everyday life, picking up boxes, moving furniture, picking up your kids, carrying them around, and so on. Another benefit of making sure we have lifting in there to keep muscle mass around is that it will help to increase your energy expenditure over time, meaning the amount of calories you burn per day. So like there's this, idea that, okay, like the more muscle you have, the more calories you're going to burn at rest, which is true. And it's not anything crazy significant. It's not like, okay, if you have 10 extra pounds of muscle, you're going to burn 1,000 extra calories per day, but it is a little bit. And I think as we age, and especially as we get older and we get a little bit less active and maybe a little bit more sedentary, the more muscle we have in our frame to just like give us the biggest benefit we can when it comes to how many calories we burn makes a big difference from maintaining our weight over time. And if you put on 10 pounds of muscle along with you consistently lifting weight still, you're consistently kind of pushing your body and consistently burning more and more calories, likely slightly, it's not something huge, but slightly for each workout that you do because you're moving more weight and you're moving more mass around and you also have more mass on your frame. So having a little bit more muscle is definitely beneficial for burning a little bit more calories during your lifting sessions, but also just at rest in general. Like I said, it's not going to make or break your fat loss. It's not going to be the difference between you losing 20 pounds or gaining 20 pounds, but it can give us a little bit of benefit, which I think is worth it. And kind of the last thing too, when it comes to maintaining muscle, which is probably one of the most important things, is if you are trying to lose weight or lose body fat and you don't have consistent lifting in there, you will lose muscle mass over time, right? Like this is kind of what this has shown. And when you lose muscle, there's this kind of hypothesis, this theory where more and more research is kind of coming out, it sounds like, where your body has this almost like muscle mass set point where if you have a certain amount of muscle and let's say you lose 20 pounds and you lose 5 pounds of muscle with that, or maybe even 10 pounds of muscle because you're really crash dieting and you're not lifting weights, your body almost has this like thermostat that senses, okay, like I lost 10 pounds of muscle. And it almost then ramps up your hunger even more to rebound even more to try to get you to overeat to potentially gain that muscle back, as quickly as possible. But muscle takes a long time to rebuild. And especially if you are not lifting weights and your body is kind of forcing or urging you to overeat to gain that muscle, but you're not lifting weights in order to gain that muscle back, you're going to gain that 10 pounds of muscle you lost back in body fat, actually. And this is why so many times when you see people who crash diet and they're constantly like yo-yoing back and forth between losing a lot of weight quickly, gaining it back, losing weight quickly, gaining it back, while also not doing good lifting resistance training to maintain their muscle, they end up after maybe a few cycles of that being the same weight that they started off with, but their body composition is actually worse, where they actually have more fat on their frame now than what they did before they even went through any of those cycles, because they've lost muscle through each of those cycles. And then because they lost a significant amount of muscle, their thermostat kind of told their brains to ramp up their hunger to try to gain that back, but they weren't doing the lifting with that to gain it back, and they gained it back in body fat. So keeping your muscle, I can't explain how important it is when you are losing body fat to keep that muscle mass around. And lifting weights, resistance training is basically a requirement of that. Like if you don't lift weights, resistance train, when you lose weight and lose body fat, like you're going to lose muscle along with it. So that's why taking that approach while then adding a step goal to keep that calorie burn up, while then adding in, a couple of maybe cardio sessions throughout the week, preferably something that you enjoy. Like I really try to encourage clients to do something that they enjoy doing, that doesn't feel like plant exercise necessarily. Like they're not going on the gym, being on the elliptical for 30 minutes if that's miserable to them. Maybe, like I said, they go outside and play pickleball, they play kickball with their kids, they chase them around the house even. Something that feels not like exercise. Having that sprinkled in on top, I think, is super beneficial to get a little bit of extra, calorie burn and fat loss from that. So, and this whole entire like meta-analysis also really emphasizes how like calories in versus calories out really is the crux of it, which is not a simple thing. Like, and this could be an entirely different podcast episode, different video. So I'm not going to go into the weeds with this, but calories in versus calories out is what fat loss and weight loss ultimately comes down to. And there's a lot of complicated processes in there, but this whole thing kind of emphasizes, hey, like even with all of these types of like training modalities, cardio, lifting, or a combination of the both, when calories are matched, the same amount of fat loss is still happening. So even regardless of which one you choose, making sure your diet, your calories, your food is in the right spot with how many calories you're eating, how much grams of protein you're eating to maintain your muscle, those still become like, I don't know if I would say the most important thing, because training, working out, exercising is still super important. Obviously, lifting weights is important for maintaining your muscle, because if you don't do that, even with the perfect diet, like you're going to lose muscle. But it does kind of put a little feather in the cap of, okay, like you can't really outwork a bad diet, because even with these different, exercise modalities, the fat loss is kind of boiling down to the same if the calories are matched. So hopefully this was kind of interesting, gave you some more guidance on how to maybe structure your workout routine. I think a minimum of 3 days per week of lifting, maybe up to 4, is great for so many people. I think having maybe 2 different cardio sessions, quote unquote, throughout the week where you're doing, something preferably that's fun, that just kind of gets your heart rate up, I think is a great addition. And then I think on top of the lifting, before maybe stressing entirely about the cardio, like let's have a minimum step goal that we hit, and maybe some of those steps, can be accounted for in the cardio that we do. If you go for a jog, you're going to rack up steps, while also you're going to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone with a little bit of cardio there. So I think having a mix of all of that seems to be a little bit more beneficial. But I think if you have to choose lifting or cardio, I do think there is an argument to be made of, okay, like the lifting maybe is like a slightly more priority. Maybe I'm a little bit biased in there, but I think making sure we maintain that muscle, especially as we age through menopause, to prevent, sarcopenia too down the road, I think is extremely important. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if it was, and I will see you guys in the next one.